Wednesday on Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to have you guys back for another day. It is Timberwolves preview day here on Daily Delivery. We're going to start that here in just a minute. Had a chance to catch up with Chris Hine, who covers the Wolves for the Star Tribune. Got a lay of the land for this season ahead, a season of great expectations for the Wolves after making the playoffs a year ago, adding Rudy Gobert in the offseason. Everybody a year older, hopefully a year wiser, a year better, but we'll see how all of the pieces fit together this season, especially in a crowded Western Conference landscape. Also, we'll visit with Chicken Fingers 69, good friend of mine, co-host, one of the many hosts of the Sportive podcast. We talked Wild a little bit and find out why he has never been more angry about anything in his life pertaining to the Minnesota Wild. Also got a kind of a juicy drama brewing with NFL owners. I want to get to that at the very end of the show. But like I said a minute ago, we're going to start with the Wolves today. We're going to go pretty deep on them. And so there's no real reason to talk about much else right now. Let's get right into the Timberwolves. My visit with Chris Hine. Caught up quickly with Jaden McDaniels on Tuesday as well. Got to ask him a question in the group setting, just kind of about the season ahead and what he's looking forward to. So let's get to that right now.
All right, let's talk some Timberwolves right now. I do a lot of that when the season is ongoing, and they start play Wednesday night. I think 9 of the first 12, including the opener, are at Target Center. Chris Hine joining me right now, of course, covers the Wolves for the Star Tribune, and it's an interesting year, Chris. A lot of expectations, obviously, after the offseason trade for Rudy Gobert. We don't know exactly how this is all going to play out. We've only seen a little bit of Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns together in the preseason and in practice together. But anything, any kind of questions you might have about how this all fits together, there's no denying that this is the most talented roster I think they've had in a very long time, and probably the biggest expectations, and for good reason, that they've had in a really long time. How would you think about that as the season is set to begin?
Yeah, 100%. And I think along with that, we finally got to see them on Friday night play together for the first time. And I think it just underscored the point that even with all this talent, with all of these expectations, this team still needs to play basketball together.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns barely shared the floor this preseason. Karl had the illness that he was battling for the first week plus of training camp. Rudy's been a little limited just because they're trying to ease him into the season after a busy summer. So Friday was the first night they took the floor together in a preseason game, and it just really underscored the fact that they're just going to need to really get reps in. It was clunky, I think, as Chris Finch called it, on both ends of the floor, offensively and defensively. You can see them out there trying to talk to each other, trying to talk their way through different things and make sure guys were in the right spaces, things like that. So it's a work in progress, not just on offense, but also on defense, because, the Wolves are, with Rudy Gobert in there, adapting to a different style of defense than they played a season ago. So it's a lot on everybody's plate right now.
I think what will be interesting too is to see how much they actually do play together during the regular season, right? Like, I imagine they start every game. Obviously, they're your two, best, highest paid players, or two of them at least. And, so you imagine they're on the floor together for the first 8 or 9 minutes at least, and then in any kind of closing situation. But beyond that, I imagine there'll be a decent amount of time where it's just one of them on the court, right? And they're kind of mixing and matching and trying to figure that out. So it's kind of a mixture of playing them both together and figuring out how they're best suited, what lineups are best when they're apart too.
That's the general idea coming into the season, is that one of them will be on the floor at all times. But the intriguing part to me about that is the Timberwolves have talked about wanting to play kind of multiple coverages on defense, and that can be tricky. It sounds easy in theory, but it can be tricky in practice to pull off, because if they play one way when Rudy Gobert is on the floor, which is a drop coverage kind of scheme, because
Right.
he's so good at being a rim protector, that requires everybody else on the floor to do a certain set of responsibilities. It requires the guards to play differently around screens, to do more rear view contesting, as it's called, where they kind of trail somebody as they're going in towards the basket, towards Gobert. But if they switch when he's not on the floor, with Karl-Anthony Towns in there at center, and they go back to maybe what they did last year, which was more of that high wall coverage, aggressive scramble kind of defense, that changes what everybody has to do. So it could be a little tricky to just, develop the habits necessary to play one way and then ask yourselves to switch for 12 to 15 minutes a night and have the team do a completely different set of responsibilities based on who's on the floor. So I think it's going to be interesting to see just how they approach that in the minutes where Gobert is or isn't on the floor. And I think it's going to, that end of the floor is going to be even a work in progress as well. It's not like this defense is just put Rudy Gobert near the basket and forget about it and everything will be fine. It changes what everybody else around him has to do, especially compared to what they were doing a year ago.
Yeah, and that's interesting because a team isn't just a collection of talent, it's how they play together. And that's just going to be, that's the mystery still right now. Like you're saying, it's, we don't know how these guys look together by and large. I mean, I think they were pretty good in the preseason, but the only game they lost was the game where they were trying to kind of sort this all out with their starters. Maybe the most surprising win they had in the preseason was when they, when those guys weren't playing and they beat the Lakers, who actually were playing some of their better players. So I think that the depth on this year's team feels like it will be pretty good and maybe can kind of carry them through some of those clunky moments. That's one of the things I feel like that's the most encouraging about this team, that they can probably survive some of and whatever this early clunkiness might be because they have some of those depth pieces. I mean, just kind of looking at who came off the bench in that Nets game. I mean, the starters were McDaniels, Edwards, Gobert, Towns, Russell. You imagine that's their starting five when everybody's healthy during the season. And you got Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, Naz Reid, Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes, and Jalen Noel off the bench. I mean, that's pretty good 11, and Jordan McLaughlin didn't even play in that game. So I feel like the bench should be pretty good in that case, but I'm also curious to see who emerges kind of as what the identity is of that bench, how those second unit kind of meshes with first unit guys, things like that. Because I feel like they figured that out pretty well towards the end of last year. And now it's not entirely different, but a significantly different cast of characters after the Gobert trade.
Yeah. And some of that's going to be how well does a certain player fit with Rudy versus maybe Karl in terms of how they divvy up the minutes. Not to say that that's going to be the sole reason why somebody's on the floor or isn't, but again, a lot of what they're going to be doing is dictated by which of those big guys is on the floor. But I do think you're right. I think a guy like Bryn Forbes has looked like he's fit in seamlessly with what they want to do, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Defense has always been his big question mark, but I think offensively, I think he's going to be very effective for them. I think Taurean Prince could play a role defensively. I think he is kind of a guy that doesn't really get talked about too much based on a lot of the new guys that they brought in, but he's somebody that they wanted to bring back and he wanted to be back here. And I could see his role being just as important as it was a season ago, especially with his ability to shoot and a little bit of his length on defense. So we've been theorizing about this for months and months. What's this going to look like? I'm just excited that we finally get to see
Yes.
what it's going to look like. Enough talking about it and plotting out who's going to be with who or whatnot. Like, we'll finally get answers to these questions, and we'll get them every other night as this team evolves.
As you've talked to these guys throughout the preseason, and I don't imagine they, let on in the direct answers. But one thing I want to watch for this year is this team had a pretty clear identity or a pretty clear kind of trajectory the last couple of years, and that was Anthony Edwards is an ascending young player who they want to develop into a superstar. He and Towns are going to get the lion's share of the shots, along with D'Angelo Russell. And Jaden McDaniels is another like intriguing young two-way player. You add Rudy Gobert to that mix, and he's not necessarily a guy who demands the ball or shots, which is nice that he can affect the game in a lot of different ways. But it does change your identity to a certain degree. It does maybe change the pecking order sometimes in terms of who's thought of as number one, number two, number three, number four, things like that. How do you think that sorts itself out with this team? Is there enough ball to go around? Is there enough, platitudes to go around to make everybody happy? Will be a question I want to see answered, especially if there are, more clunky moments than smooth moments early on.
Yeah. And D'Angelo Russell hinted at that the other night where he said, look, there's going to be some nights where guys might have to sacrifice a little bit of their numbers or whatnot for the, greater good of winning. It might not be a night where somebody dominates on the stat sheet, but the team wins because somebody else was maybe cooking that night. So, that's going to be a dynamic, especially with, a young player like Edwards, who if he's not getting, 20 plus a night, is he going to be okay with that? Is D'Lo going to be okay with that ultimately in a contract year? Rudy doesn't just want to grab offensive rebounds for his points either. He wants to be involved in the flow of the offense as well. So, like you said, is there enough to go around? Don't know yet. Winning helps things. Like if the team is winning, everybody, looks worse when they complain if the team is winning. But if they do get off to a clunky start losing some games that maybe they should win, and guys aren't getting their numbers, does that doubt start to creep in? I think the schedule sets up favorably for them early on here to work out some of these issues while still winning games. But they also got off to a slow start last year. Last year's start was pretty bad. It was their worst part of the season was their first month or so. So, with a new team, do they get off to a slow start again this year?
Believe I was writing, if things don't improve quickly, they might need to trade Karl-Anthony Towns posts early last year because it was that bad. And by we, I mean I was still pining for Ben Simmons at that moment. I'm glad that never happened. Chris Hine, I don't think that would have been the direction they necessarily wanted to go, but I think they came into it in a good place. They won 46 games, and I think they're in a good spot to improve on that by a significant number of games. A few more thoughts for you before we go. You brought up D'Angelo Russell. He's not the forgotten guy because he still carries a pretty hefty salary into what you noted as a contract year for him, and for all of the ups and downs, and maybe that's kind of the point of all this. He really made this team go last year for better or for worse. What do you think they get from him this year? A motivated player, a player who is kind of understanding his place in the organization because he didn't get that extension. How do you think that sorts itself out?
I keep coming back to this. The one time he was an all-star was in a contract year.
Yep.
There's nothing like the potential loss of several millions of dollars to motivate somebody to play their best and be available, which has been part of his issue as well over the years. So very interested to see how he responds this season. He said all the right things publicly. He's come in with a very upbeat attitude. The team has also, praised his attitude coming in this year. There could be awkwardness around situations like this. Player, a big name player in a contract year doesn't get an extension. A lot of trade rumors. These things can cause a lot of problems. But seemingly, it has not. So, credit to him and to the team for kind of whatever, just smoothing things, making sure things are smooth and running smoothly going into the season. But yeah, he lifts the ceiling of this team when he plays well. That is his biggest contribution. When he is a factor on a night where he's rolling, they look phenomenal. When he struggles, this team might struggle overall because he has to be the engine that stirs the drink on the offense. So I just mixed my metaphors.
I was going to say, did you say the engine that stirs the drink?
The engine that stirs the drink. This is good thing. Good thing I'm not paid to write professionally for a living or anything like that. But
I'm use that from now on.
He's got to be, and that's what Chris Finch was saying the other day. Is like, look, especially with him, he's probably got to be the guy that maybe takes a little bit of a sacrifice with his numbers, because he's got to get everybody else going early on in the season here as they try and get this new offense going with Karl and Rudy playing together.
Yeah, well, and we've belabored this probably too much, but you only have to look back to last year's postseason. I mean, the play-in game against the Clippers where he was transcendent, got them over the finish line and got them into the matchup they wanted with Memphis, only to struggle in that series, including not playing down the stretch in Game 6, that elimination game where they again lost a large lead and fell in that series in 6 games. Given all that, Chris Hine, I think you mentioned floor and ceiling of D'Angelo Russell, or the ceiling that he raises it for them. Just going into this year, I feel like the floor is higher for this team than maybe it has been. As is the ceiling. It's kind of determining where they ultimately settle. That's the big question. What do you think is best and worst case scenario, assuming nothing catastrophic? Let's just assume that everybody is reasonably healthy, and doesn't, that there's not something super weird that happens. Given that, what do you think is kind of what's the baseline expectation, and what's the way optimistic expectation?
Well, I think if everybody's reasonably healthy, I do think they're going to win a lot of games. I see them winning a lot of regular season games. And does that mean a top 3 Western Conference seed? Maybe. Who knows? You never know with injury and availability and guys around the league, the more veteran star players taking time off if they have something that's bothering them a little bit. I just think the Wolves, and I think this team has a lot of guys that tend to play a lot of games. So I see that as the ceiling. Now, whether that means a top 3 seed in the Western Conference translating to, a second round playoff appearance, I think is a different question when other teams are healthy and ready to go come playoff time. The floor, I kind of see more as what happened last year. I think that's the floor. Play-in team, potentially high 7 seed ish. Because look, the Western Conference is still really tough.
And it was worse than expected last year.
It was.
They benefited from that.
They benefited from that. A lot of guys got hurt. There was weirdness going on with some teams, and they just benefited from all that kind of luck. But you look around the Western Conference now. Kawhi Leonard is back with the Clippers. Denver is getting their second and third best players back healthy this year. The Pelicans might be a force, for instance, towards the bottom of the standings. Phoenix is still there. Golden State is Golden State. You just go down the list, and it's like any one of these teams could finish ahead of the Timberwolves if things go a bad way.
Yeah, well, we'll start to get answers on Wednesday against Oklahoma City, 7 p.m. at Target Center. Chris Hine will be there covering all of the action for you, the dear listener and dear reader. Chris Hine, good stuff. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Mike.
One thing that was fairly quickly forgotten in the organizational and fan euphoria over how that regular season ended last year when the Wolves won 46 games, won that, early play-in game, got into a competitive series. They started out the year quite poorly. They were 4-9 at one point last year before turning things around. They weren't above 500 for a long time that season. Finally got above 500. It was not until they got to 24-23 on January 25th. Up until that point, they'd been trying to get over that hump, but that 4-9 start really set them back, and then they finally kind of got past that point, racked up a bunch of wins towards the end of the year. But that's a good thing to remember as they try to go forward this year. And Jaden McDaniels alluded to that when I had a chance to ask him just kind of what excites him about the season ahead for the Wolves.
Aside from just the season starting, what excites you the most about the opportunity here?
Just a new team, I would say. Just really to see like how we start off and just throughout the season, like how we react through like adversity and like through being at the highs and the lows.
When you think about that adversity stuff, last year it started slow and you guys were able to kind of level out. Do you think that experience at the beginning of last year will kind of help you get on the right track right away at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I think it will. Just going through that last year and then knowing at some point of the season there's going to be adversity. So just all of us coming in as one and then just trying to fix the problems we have or certain things through the offense and defense.
And that was Dane Moore on the follow-up question there. And, I think that's an interesting point. This is a team that has, a lot of the same key core pieces that they had a year ago. But when you bring in Rudy Gobert, expectations change and your style of play is going to change a little bit. How does that look early in the season in particular as they're trying to sort all this out? Now, I think the schedule, like Chris Hine and I talked about, is favorable. 9 of the first 12 at home. They start out with Oklahoma City, a team that's definitely still in rebuild mode. So, a lot of these veteran players they have and the defense they should have can carry them in these early moments, I think, when they're still trying to figure out everything that they're trying to do offensively. But that's a point to watch this year. How quickly does this all come together as they try to not just make the playoffs, but become a team that's a real threat in the Western Conference? So looking forward to that. That all gets underway tonight at 7 p.m. at Target Center against Oklahoma City. Read all of Chris Hine's coverage, of course, in the Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. And I'll have some more thoughts on the Wolves in written form on Wednesday on the website as well.
One of the best things about Daily Delivery is we occasionally have a recurring segment called Have You Ever Been More Angry? And for that segment, I bring in my good friend Chicken Fingers 69 of Twitter fame, of Sportive podcast fame. And Chicken Fingers, sir, I was a guest on your podcast last week where we talked about the Wild, and you expressed a great deal of pessimism about the team's goaltending situation. I want to talk to you about that and the disappearance of Marco Rossi's playing time. Those two things in tandem, sir, I have to ask you, have you ever been more angry?
Michael, thank you for having me on again. And no, I have never been more angry.
Seems like every time you are on, your anger is eclipsed. And, maybe that's just how it's going to be for the rest of your life. You're just going to keep getting angrier and angrier. But I think in this case, it's warranted. You tried to warn the Wild about the goaltending. You said, I don't know if I like the plan of Fleury and Gustafsson. Fleury didn't look great in your estimation a year ago after they got him, didn't look great with Chicago before he was acquired. And this year has not been great. Now, I will say Kaapo Kähkönen has not been off to a good start, and Cam Talbot's hurt. So I'm not sure the alternatives were all that great. But what they have decided to do right now, 20 goals in 3 games, doesn't lie.
Yeah, and what are they going to do about it? They've kind of painted themselves into a corner. They, the original plan was to have Fleury and Talbot, and Talbot got hurt in Ottawa. Would he have gotten hurt here? That's right. It's obviously different circumstance. So their original plan would have been had Fleury, let's say Fleury had been this miserable, then they can turn to Talbot, who is a proven NHL goalie, had success at this level. Now, instead, the plan has to be turning to Gustafsson, who's got maybe 20 some NHL starts, doesn't have, and in those starts hasn't shown a ton of promise. He had a good training camp apparently, but that's about all they're leaning on. So no, they're in a lot of trouble. They're right now. Hope, as you wrote, is their strategy. That's just hope that Fleury is either injured, maybe a slight tweak. Gustafsson can pick it up with experience. That's their strategy, that their defense can play better. I don't know how much hope it is a strategy, but that's really all I've got.
Well, and the best goalie in the organization, or the most promising one, is obviously Jasper Wallstedt, but he's 19. He won't be 20 until next month. I mean, that's not really a plan either, even though you keep tweeting, free Jasper.
No, you can't. That's more tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
He's got to spend some time down in detasseling corn down in Des Moines or whatever they do down there. Get him some experience down in Iowa, and that's just fine. I understand that. Get him some American Hockey League experience, and before they bring him up. But no, that's not an alternate. That's not an alternative. I don't know what they're going to do. They're just going to pray that Fleury is just going through a streak, that he's older now, so it's going to take him maybe some time to get into the groove. I don't know.
Player who is younger, and let's get to the heart of the matter here. Marco Rossi had a really good preseason, and preseason being what it is, you can't read too much into it, but made the team out of the preseason by all accounts, by watching him in the preseason, by hearing what was said and written about him. Sounded like he had earned a spot. Plays 10 minutes in the opener. Starts on the fourth line, which is fine. That you get your feet wet, and it's a line that can produce anyway. Second game, he's down to fewer than 5 minutes. Third game, he's down to 0 minutes. A healthy scratch. That's troublesome, because that's a guy even if you're not saying you're counting on him, you need some of these young guys, chicken fingers, especially in the first of the Parisi Suter buyout hell years.
Yeah. And this isn't really, as you touched on about coming onto the Sportive podcast, the things that we're complaining about are not, this isn't hindsight. There was 3 things that we covered in that podcast that we had concerns about. It was the goalie tandem. It was the overall team defense, which I think has obviously struggled to start, and how the Wild were going to handle Marco Rossi. I could see what was coming, because I'm not picking on Dean. All coaches love to do this. They love to take a talented young hockey player and say, you know what, we're just going to put him through the grind. We're going to put him on the fourth line. We're going to teach him how to play the right way. And they love doing this with talented guys, because they love doing this with talented, young, good players, because talented players will eventually be good. And then the coach can say, look, there he is. Look how talented he is. Look how well how successful he's doing now. That's because of all that fourth line time I made him, taught him how to play the game the right way. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I knew that they were going to do this with Rossi, with the way they've handled him so far. And this organization did it with Zucker, and other NHL organizations do it. So they're certainly not unique. I'm not picking on Dean, but it drives me crazy. And you hear people talk about, well, if they're going to do this, then they might as well send Rossi to Iowa too, and get him playing time down there. If he's not going to play, you might as well go to Iowa. No, play him on the top line. Play him 18 minutes a game. They got Fred Goudreau. I'm not calling him Freddie. I'm not calling a grown man Freddie. Fred Goudreau. Playing 16, 18 minutes a game. He doesn't have a point. He's playing on the top, centering in between Kaprizov and Zook, and he still doesn't have a point. He's on the power play, still doesn't have a point. He's played like 50 minutes so far in the season. Premier minutes, doesn't have a point. Those minutes, give him to Rossi. Goudreau does some good things. He plays defense well. He's a premier fourth line player, just like what they've got. The role that Rossi's playing right now should be Goudreau's role. Have him do it. Have Rossi, and if Rossi's gonna make mistakes, let him make those mistakes. But right now, Goudreau's not giving you anything offensively. He's not like he's this spectacular defensive superstar. He's fine. He's a fourth line player. So flip flop the roles. Don't send Rossi to Iowa. Give him Goudreau's minutes, and let's see what happens. But
if he can't cut it, then he can't cut it, right? I mean, then we know.
It's pretty likely that he will cut it. He's cut it everywhere he's ever been in his life.
I agree.
He's a very talented player. It might take a third of a season, maybe a half a season for it to click, but it will click. But is Gaudreau going to match that ceiling? No. The chances of that are unlikely, not just unlikely, that it's just simply not going to happen.
Last thing for you. Yeah, you pointed out all these things last week and they've all essentially come true. Have you been issued any sort of apology or any sort of recognition aside from me right now saying that you were correct all this, that you had the foresight to call these things into question before the season started?
A couple times a day I'll check my Twitter account, I'll check emails on my cell phone, just the regular land mail, just regular mail. I've called my attorney's office my see if any formal apologies have been issued to my attorney. Nothing to date, not a single apology from anybody.
I can see why you've never been angrier. And I think it's warranted. They're 0-3. They've given up 20 goals. That would anger anybody, but especially you, who had the courage to say, the king has no pants. Is that what he said? Is that the
king has no pants? Elvis? No, you're talking about the whole parable. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the expression? I might have messed that up a little bit.
The emperor has no clothes.
Emperor has no clothes. The king has no pants. I can't believe I said that, but that's definitely staying in. That might even be an episode title. I can see why you're so angry nonetheless. And I can only imagine that next time we talk, for whatever reason, you'll be even angrier.
That's the way it's been going. Yep.
Let's finish with the cooler. Some juicy stuff coming out of the NFL. Colts owner Jim Irsay saying there is merit to remove Daniel Snyder as the owner of the Washington Commanders franchise. You got Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft apparently sparring at the owners' meetings. Some stuff about an extension perhaps for Roger Goodell, the commissioner. This is getting kind of interesting. I think a lot of this sparked by Daniel Snyder. There's a big story in ESPN. I believe it was late last week about some tension there about how owners don't like Daniel Snyder. They would like to get him out of there, but nobody necessarily going on the record with that until now with Jim Irsay. So watch for that. I mean, the owners love nothing more than the owners love than making money. And as much as not Robert Kraft, as much as Daniel Snyder has been a problem in a lot of different areas, the way that he's run that franchise poorly from a financial standpoint is the big problem there as far as a lot of owners are concerned. So how that all plays out will be kind of a fun drama, a fun subplot to this NFL season. Nothing really impacting the Vikings a whole lot, but would be interesting to know what they think of what the Wilfs think of Daniel Snyder as well, but maybe that is a story for another time. But just kind of some fun little drama if you like that sort of thing in the NFL. And that will do it for today. Should be a lot of Gopher football talk on Thursday's show as they head to Penn State this weekend. Also full coverage of the Wolves opener. Friday looking like a great show as well. I'll have Marcus Fuller on, covers college basketball for the Star Tribune. Big recruit coming into Gophers basketball. They just found that out early this week. We'll get to the bottom of how someone who is number 13 in the country wound up with Ben Johnson and the Gophers program. So that will be on Friday's show. Thank you again for joining me here today. I'm Michael Rand. We'll be back at it again tomorrow.